Mark has put the agenda and the sign-in sheet. Just to let you know the agenda. On your agenda, you will see a link to the resources for today. You will also see a link to the workbook. So if you click on the workbook, it's in view. So you don't want to add it to your drive, and then you can follow along today's presentation. And you will also find our sign-in and evaluation. So you could have this open on your browser as another tab. It'll be handy. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Really excited about this. We always start off our workshops with a land grant acknowledgement. The UCLA History Geography Project is in fact a land grant institution. And as such, we acknowledge that the Tongva Gabrielino peoples are the traditional caretakers of the land that was originally known as Tobangar, which is the Los Angeles Basin to the Southern Channel Islands. And we are going to put a really cool resource in the chat right now. And this resource will help you and your students identify the indigenous lands that you're on by using GPS. It's called nativeland.ca, really great website. It's just a reminder to please sign in. There is a QR code here, so if you want to just grab your phone and scan this and sign in, you could also sign in through the agenda or the links that are shared in the chat. We have multiple ways of supporting you throughout this workshop. Okay, just a little bit about our agenda for today. We are currently in the Welcome Land Acknowledgement Introduction portion of today's workshop. In a minute, I'm going to pass the mic to my colleague Amparo, and she's going to do our inclusion for today. We're going to then tell you a little bit about ourselves, and then as you can see, we're going to go ahead and start to look at 2 literacy strategies today, and then we'll talk about next steps and what we're going to be doing at the next workshop as well. All right, if you have any questions at any point, just feel free to ask those questions in the chat, and we'll help you as quickly and promptly as we can. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic to my colleague Amparo, who's going to walk you through our inclusion activity for today.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to ask you to take a moment and jot down some notes. It is in your workbook, and to think about some thoughts. It doesn't have to be full sentences. It could be notes, it could be bullets, whatever you feel comfortable with based on the quote that's going to follow, and then be prepared to share out in a breakout room. So, and this breakout room, there'll be 2 people in this breakout room. That way there's a lot of time to share. So those of you who are just coming on, we're going to share a quote. You're going to take down some notes, and then we're going to go into a breakout room. Okay, next slide. Okay, I'll give you a moment to read the quote and to think.
Folks, that chat is for you to engage with one another and continue the conversation as we are presenting. Feel free to use that. This is our team. We're a pretty small team. That's me right there. I was a former history teacher. Like I said earlier, I taught for 13 years. I taught at Roosevelt High School in Boyle Heights, Southern California, and then at El Rancho High School, which is located in Pico Rivera, California. And I've been here at UCLA for almost 9 years, which is amazing for me to say. Our associate director, Cindy Mata, is not here today. Today is a day off for her, but she's also a former teacher, and she does a lot of our ethnic studies work. And then I'm joined by my other colleagues who are going to introduce themselves to you right now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amparo Chavez Gonzalez, better known as AMPS. And I've been an educator for 32 years, almost 33. And I am one of the dubious talents that I have is that I can quote Common Core. Don't hate me, but I can do that oftentimes, right? I've taught 3rd through 12th graders. I've been mostly a history teacher, an English teacher, and then other subjects. And I'm really, really excited to be here today. And Mark?
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark, and I'm the program manager for the project, and I've been here for 3 years now. And yeah, so I'll also be helping. So I'm not an educator, but love to see the work that gets done, and I'll be here to support anyone on the tech side. So if you need any help, feel free to message me on the chat. And yeah.
Thank you, Mark. And then this is just, I'm sorry, Am, did I cut you off?
No, you're good.
So this is just an overview of our teacher leaders. We have quite a large group of teacher leaders who are full-time teachers who take time to work with the project to facilitate workshops like this or write lessons for us. We're really proud of them, and we're gonna be joined by some of our teacher leaders in the upcoming workshops. Okay, so let's go ahead and move forward, and I'm going to pass it back to my colleague Amparo, who's going to talk to you about the outcomes and a little bit of why we're here today.
Okay, we can click. So today we're going to be doing a lot of collaboration. Those of you who have participated in our workshops know we do a lot of breakout rooms, talking, conversations, chats. It's really not a place where we don't like webinars, so we like to interact with folks, right? And today we're going to talk a lot about this connection between rigor, literacy, engagement, and culturally relevant and sustaining pedagogies. We're also going to think a lot about what does it mean to be culturally responsive and use sustaining pedagogies while you're also really striving for engagement and rigor in your classroom. And so we hope that some of the things we're going to share with you resonate. And please, 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 if you use them, please give us credit. Tell folks you got them from us, of course, but also let us know how you use them because we love to hear back from folks when they tweak things or try them out. So we love it when you participate in that way with us. And Daniel? So why we are here, right? As you saw in that quote when we first began, lots of us, Chris mentioned, right? You know, from student teaching, from everything that we've been hearing, our kids really are struggling with how to do school, right? And now we have this other perspective, right? How do we as educators start to respond to some of the things that kids are struggling with, but also some of the innovations that were created during stay home, and also with what kids now is resonating with students and with families and what their needs are, right? How do we as teachers update and elevate not only our thinking and our content, but our pedagogies as well? And again, we're going to try to do some of that thinking with you today. So if you could go on. Next slide. For those of you who are from California, hardly anybody told us who they were and they were from. I'm all bummed. Don't forget to tell us where you teach, your name. Okay, we love to know who we're interacting with. Yeah, there you go, right? This is a quote that I really love, right? That really gets us thinking about this idea of culture of CRE now becoming CRSP, right? What does it mean to be culturally sustaining? What does it mean to come even now, right now, even though this pandemic really messed up a lot of things and threw us off our game in many ways? What does it mean to come with an asset-based pedagogy into teaching? And what does that look like when we think about what our young people are needing? And so we are going to do our best to think through these ideas with you, and we're excited to have you on board. There we go. Yay. Somebody teaches toddlers to 22. Oh my goodness. Guadalupe. Oh my God, look at this. See, now I'm excited. People from all over the place. Rialto. Yeah, there you go. Palm Springs in the house. Woohoo. Long Beach. Hey, yes, this is exciting. See, you guys are warming my heart. Somebody from Vancouver, Washington. Woo. So some of these standards and things that I'm going to talk about for those folks from Vancouver, they might not connect to your content standards, but hey, teach us about yours as well. We'd love to hear from it. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. All right. And now I'm going to walk you through when we talk about culturally sustaining pedagogies. One of the things that we really like to encourage folks to do is to really think about how do you use your own local history to infuse literacy, right? How does engagement play into that? We know that kids are really hungry And in California, our standards are not connected to our local communities. So Daniel, if you can go on to the next slide. So we're gonna play with something, what I've been calling the 7 C's of critical historical thinking, right? Right? So what is it? It's a way for us to think about critical thinking skills. It's a way for us to scaffold different ways of thinking about language and skills and writing. It's a way for us to develop vocabulary, but it's also a way for us to think about how do you read in smaller chunks? How do you write in smaller chunks to get to longer chunks of reading and writing? And I think that one of the things that people always forget, especially social studies teachers, is we love to have that big essay, right? But if you think about the Common Core standards, that 10 says to write, I think it's 7, it might be 7 and 10 say to write for prolonged periods of time, to write different types of writing. So it doesn't always have to be a huge essay, right? It can be something shorter. It can still build that criticality and have students thinking about the connection between evidence and claims as well. Next slide. Okay, so I want to be very clear. When I looked at this, I looked at the anchor standards for writing in the Common Core, and I shared those with you, right? Looking at different types of writing, and then reading standards, right? How do we assess point of view? How do we integrate information from other sources? How do we look at sources that are covering the same or similar topics, right? How do we pick out some evidence when we're reading? Next slide. Okay. As well as speaking and listening standards, because the activity we're going to do right now, you're going to be talking to people in your group. You're going to be looking at what are they saying, what are they thinking, and then obviously those ELD standards, right, about speaking, right, interpreting, listening to others, and figuring out if the evidence and what they're saying makes sense, and then how do you respond to that, those are really big, right? But again, in social studies, when we ask kids to do that, many times, especially in elementary, we ask them, what do you notice and what do you wonder? We don't take it to the criticality, right? But in the middle school and high school, we ask all that, but our ELDs don't have the language. So how do we start scaffolding and building those, both in elementary and then also middle school and high school? So next, Danny. All right, so why do we use it, right? It's going to enable us to use local images to build engagement and get kids hooked, but also to build some of that literacy that we want, right? It's getting kids to see themselves in the history. It's getting kids to see their community and across time to see how their communities have changed, the issues that their community has been dealing with and working with, and ways that their community has had agency and empowered themselves to deal with different situations, right? And I just want to make sure that you know that, and I messed up. I didn't put a link for the 4 C's and 6 C's. I will do that later so that you guys have them. But we've been playing with the 4 C's of analyzing sources and the 6 C's for a while in our project, in our state project. And we have a version that's for visuals and one for written. What I started to play with and what my colleagues at the project did is we started to try to combine it, and we're going to share that with you today. Okay, next slide, please. You can make a copy of this for yourself. I'm putting it in there again. Okay, and you can check out the different categories. So the way that I've been thinking and playing with this is that you can choose what squares you want to use. And this is a version I created for elementary school students. Okay, you can choose what squares you want to use. You can choose what order you want to use them in. And you can choose which of those questions within each box you want to use, depending on the content that you are teaching, but also depending on what you want students to respond to in a particular source or text or video or audio. Okay, so I know I see folks looking, checking them out. Okay. I want to take a moment and pause there and see, are there any questions, comments real quick? And can you go down to the second page? I really want to call everyone's attention to how do we think about, there's a lot of conversations now about how do we embed social justice into the teaching of our history social studies, right? And how do we embed some of that criticality of really looking and having that critical analysis, that lens to think about history. And so one of the things that we really tried hard to combine for you is to think about how do we get little ones, right? Or little tiny ones, to think about these ideas of calling to action and helping others and showing empathy, but also thinking about relationships of power, right? And how do we build that? And so again, as a teacher, you can decide where you want to use these and how you want to use them. And what we're going to do right now, now we can go back to the slides, Danny. All right. So what we're going to invite you is, you're going to be in a group of 4. Mark is going to open up breakout rooms. You're going to get to look at image A or B. We're going to put the link for that. You're going to choose someone to jot down some ideas. Okay. As a group, you want to respond to the questions, right? And then in your breakout room, you want to have a general conversation about how do these questions ask the students promote critical thinking, and how do these questions promote some of those common core skills that you're being asked to constantly show that you're working on, okay? Yes. Yes. So in the past, our 7Cs also did a lot more contextualizing. We're trying to update. Again, we're talking about how do we come at, now after the pandemic, right? How do we come at this idea of updating and elevating what we do with our students, and what kind of sources and resources do we use that is still connected to our content standards, but it's showing up in ways that is highlighting the rich history of California as well, and local communities. So here we go. Can you go to the next slide, Danny? The sources you're going to look at are these 2 sources, and you'll see that there'll be questions connected to the 7 Cs. We're going to give you about 10 minutes in your groups to talk, to fill this out and to talk to one another. And I am going to put the link for you. And Mark is opening up breakout rooms, Mark? Yes?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. So if you could join your breakout group rooms, we'd greatly appreciate it. All right, welcome back, everyone. If you feel comfortable unmuting or sharing in the chat, what did you, as an educator, what did you notice? What stood out? What are you wondering about? Anyone?
Okay,
One
I'll
thing that-
start. Okay, go ahead, go ahead.
Oh, sure. One thing that stood out to me was, because they were familiar. I'm from Pasadena, and so my high school, when it was first built, had that beautiful we finished sort of photograph of it, and then how over time, as the heat took its toll, how all the windows got filled up with air conditioners, and then we see the growth of the landscape and that kind of thing.
All right, thank you. Anyone else?
One of the things we discussed in our group was the active engagement, the active participation, the accountability. Another colega said if the student feels shy or timid and they don't want to participate, then she would have the student write it down on a Post-it, and then the teacher would read it out loud. Another thing that was discussed was using the native language. So if the native language is, for example, Espanol, then the child was encouraged and allowed to participate in that language. And if the child, again, is timid or shy, the teacher would then respond for the child, reading the post-it that the child wrote for them.
And another way that you can also think about this is all 4 children don't have to work on it together. You could have one child work on one square, depending on their language ability, depending on where they're at. And they could work on that one square and then come to their partners to say, this is what I got, right, for my square. So that you can also make it into a jigsaw. You could have kids in an expert work group working on one square and then going to a home group as well, right? So there's a lot of different ways that you could think about using this, right? And it's familiar, right? It's like, I want you to know that, oh, I also see somebody said, I like the expanded questions for students to dig deeper, right? It's not just like, I notice and I wonder, we're inviting students to infer, what is this building getting used for? And in the past, I've had first and second graders tell me, I think it's a post office. I think it's a gym. A couple of kids have said, I think it's a hospital. And some of them have also said, I think it's a school, right? And for those of you who clicked on the hyperlinks, this is Bradley Elementary in 1927, right? And then this is Bradley Elementary in 2015, when after it became the Tom Bradley Environmental School. So it's the same building, right? But close to 100 years, 90 years later, right? And so one of the conversations that you can have with kids is, why did it look different? Why was it there this way, right? And kids get all excited when you can find pictures of their school from way back. So the kids loved this when we did it with them, and we did it just like we did with you. We did this with an activity with younger students. We did it with the K1 and the second grade different times during the pandemic as well. So again, we're inviting kids to think right outside of the box. Anyone else? Any other comment? I appreciated all your comments. They're wonderful. Anyone else?
In our group, we talked about using providing sentence frames so that students have some words to kind of narrow in their thinking as they shared out their thoughts. And then the other ideas that we shared was something that I've been doing with my students when we look at images is to break down the parts of speech that they see in the image first, to kind of help them make a word bank that they can then pull from. So what are the nouns that they see in the image? What are the adjectives? What are the verbs? That kind of thing. So that as they dialogue their thinking, they have this list of words that they can go back to and pull from.
I love it. Wonderful. And Danny, if you could go, Danny, we could go to the slide that has the 7 C's? So if you look at this, one of the reasons why I provided for you a blank one is that, again, I love that idea of putting in some sentence starters in there based on the questions that you're asking, so that students can fill out that sentence as they're writing down their answers, right? I saw, right? I noticed, right? I think this building is used as, right? And so you can start again, depending on how much your students are ready to write, depending on how much your students are working on certain vocabulary, you can have those sentence starters in those blank squares as you develop those for your students. So thank you. I love those 2 ideas. I might steal one of them. All right. And Dania, we could come back. And we're going to go to the next slide. So now I'm going to ask you to do this a second time. And I want to give you a couple of disclaimers, okay? So for these next set of images and pieces, because now you're going to get some reading, I'm very much aware that you would use the chunks of written text with older students. I would try some of this maybe with the 5th grade class, but probably, or even a 4th grade class, depending on how much I could play with the language and how much I could chunk it, right? But these, I chunked them thinking of middle schoolers, right, who also do American history, and 10th and 11th graders, so that you could see the progression. But the first one, sources C and D, are, you could still use them with elementary school. Sources C, sources E through G, you would have to use with an older group of students. And so we're going to ask you again, and I see a typo on the screen. Sorry, it's messing me up when I see my own typos. Now we're going to ask you to, how might you use these to have students now start thinking about social justice issues, and for students to be thinking about what does it mean to take action and to show some more empathy for others, but also to think about how you build those literacy skills as you're also getting kids to think about their place in the world and how they support others and support their community to have a better life. So we could go to the next slide. So these are going to be sources C and D, right? And then you have E, F, G, and H. See, I don't know my alphabet. I was going to only put 3 sources. I apologize. And you're going to get, again, you're going to be given some time to play with the sources and to answer these questions. I really encourage you to try to give your team some time to look at this first set of sources and then the second one as well. Okay. All right. So Mark is going to put us into breakout rooms one more time. All right. I think we have almost everyone back. All right. Once again, what did you guys notice? What is resonating? What did this bring up in terms of questions around social justice and civic engagement? If you got to the second set of sources, I'd love to hear as well. Anyone?
Our group needed a little bit more time for that part. We're still on steps 1, 2, and 3. Sorry.
Ah, okay. Yeah, no. Yeah, I realized a couple of folks are really taking their time. Thank you for saying that. Danny kept on saying I should allot more time to this. It was right. So-
I'll start. Well, these questions encourage historical critical thinking skills by making comparisons between the two. You start with level 1 questions such as what's going on here, details, and then connect. Those questions become more, it requires the students to think beyond what's there. It requires them to think in hypothetical or creative, in creative ways, things that are not really obvious. So yeah, so the 4 questions really add to that. Yeah, that's how they encourage critical thinking skills.
Thank you. Danny, can you go to the slide before? So source C is 39th Street School, previously known as 38th Street School, and now known as Tom Bradley. So those are students in 1958 at Tom Bradley Elementary. And the source D are students at Tom Bradley during the pandemic, right? I don't know if anyone noticed that they were wearing masks. So again, this invites us to think about how has this community changed, right? What happened, right? How did the community change so much? What happened to the the white students and the Japanese American students that we see in the picture in source C, right? How has this community really changed? And then if you look at source E and F, G and H, you start to learn that originally this community was a planned community that pretty much was a segregated community. It was not welcoming to African Americans or people of other nationalities or colors, right? And now in source H, they're saying Mr. Lemert would be really shocked to know that the community is African American and Latino, right? Like this would be a shock to the Lemert family and to Lemert and the Olmsted brothers who created this planned community. And they were famous planned community architects and developers who created Lemert Park, right? And so it's important for us to think about how do we get, middle school and high school students to think about urbanization, right? To think about immigration as part of this conversation, right? To think about what happens when covenants are broken and 1948 in California, segregation, housing segregation is put a stop to, right? What does that all mean for how this community has changed and evolved and how it has seen itself throughout the decades, right? It's this wonderful, beautiful community. How are these changes evolved? How did these changes evolve in this community, right? And when you think about the last questions that we asked you for sources G and H was to start thinking about how is the community today, right, trying to preserve its heritage as you look at source H, and how is this community dealing with landlords pushing them out? So it starts to allude to gentrification, right? And you can easily then connect the sources and this conversation to then thinking about what does it look like when a community is fighting gentrification, when a community is trying to preserve some of its cultural juice, right? And juju, as you want to call it, right? Oh, I see from someone. Yeah, you can find a lot of these resources in your folder. I created a list. I gave you all the resources for Lemert Park, and then I gave you some ideas at the end of where else you can look. Calisphere is one of our favorite places to look for sources around community and local history. My other favorite one, and I know you would not think so, but the Department of Water and Power has its own museum. And it has sources on there. And what I did for Lemert Park is I put Lemert Park and I found Tom Bradley 38th Street School, and then I found the current picture of it. Those are where those came from, right? Yes, we will put for you the link to the teacher resource folder. So you have these in your resource folder. You have those sources about Lemert Park. And one other source that I'll put in your folder right now will be a one pager that we have about where to look for sources for community and local history. I'll put that in there as well in a minute. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm excited that you got to play with the 7 C's. Hopefully, again, if any of you try it, please let us know. And we are going to go into a break. We're going to take a 6-minute break, and we'll be back at 5:45. Thank you, everyone.
All right, everyone. Hopefully that was enough time to get a quick stretch in and grab something to drink. We are coming down to the home stretch here. We have one more strategy that we're excited to share with you. And before we do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the approaches that we take to literacy and history and social studies, as well as ethnic studies. And I'm going to emphasize a few points. So on this slide, you will notice a bullet point list of things that we lean on when we think about literacy and history social studies. A lot of the work that we do is in collaboration with teachers. It's strategies that teachers are using, are thinking about, and sometimes we will collaborate with those teachers to create new strategies. We're lucky enough to be the School of Education, and we have the best education school in California. And so we are always talking to our professors and scholars there for some ideas. We also want to shout out our teaching experience. We are all former teachers. We've all worked with English learners. I used to teach a class called Sheltered. I don't know if that rings a bell. This is back in 2000, 2001 at Roosevelt. So we also lean heavily on our teaching experience when we talk about literacy. I want to talk about a few things. The first thing I want to talk about is the California History Framework. The California History Framework is really sort of reconstructing what history education is what history education is. I'll stop there. In the past, the emphasis or overemphasis was on content. And what the framework is doing is incorporating the other parts of the discipline that have been sort of neglected during the era of CST. And that includes inquiry, asking good historical inquiry questions. That obviously includes literacy, the kinds of literacy that the discipline of history is asking students to practice. And that includes what the framework refers to as citizenship, but what we at the project like to refer to as civics or action civics. So these are the sort of instructional shifts in the framework, also known as CLICK, which is a nice acronym to help us remember those 4 instructional shifts. As I'm presenting, if you want to have any comments or make any points, or maybe point out something that I'm failing to point out, you can again just continue that conversation in the chat. We pulled this quote from the California History Framework. Just go ahead and take a moment to read through it. There's actually 2 quotes there. So one of the things that, and feel free to share. Thank you, Jessica, for pointing that out. One of the things that this quote, like what resonates with me is that so many of these pieces, right, seem to be working in tandem. The inquiry and the literacy work in tandem, the content and the engagement work in tandem. And then sort of what we do with the inquiry, with the content, with the lesson to get our students to start thinking about how history is helping them make sense of the moment that they're living in, making sense of the present. And we start getting into like civics and action civics. So these things are all really connected. The other thing that comes out to me is the sort of design. The design, the word design always makes me think of designing lessons to improve learning outcomes. And I'm going to spend a couple of minutes here, not too long. I'm just going to sort of let you absorb this slide because I know it's a lot to look at. So what you're looking at is a theory called information processing theory. And if you are familiar with Soretta Hammond's book, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain, she talks a lot about information processing theory. So what this I guess, framework represents is kind of how the mind works, right? And so for right now, as I'm talking, all the auditory and the visuals from the screen is going into your short-term sensory store. And then that stuff is just kind of deleted. The things that you don't need to remember are deleted, for lack of a better term, by your brain. So for example, you might be at a stop sign, you might be next to a car who has music on, and maybe you like that song. And so in the moment you're focused, but maybe 10 minutes later, you forget that happened. You forget the song, right? This is sort of like, it's just in and out. But when we focus our attention and when we ask our students to focus attention, we start getting into working memory, right? And so this is like the whole idea of constructing and designing a lesson. It's to sort of minimize distractions for students, minimize that visual and auditory things that are going to compete with the attention that you want them to pay. And when we start asking students, hey, I want you to really focus on this. This is important. When we say things like this, we're asking students to maintain attention. And students can do that for anywhere between 5 and 20 minutes, depending on the age group. The younger the students, after 5 minutes of like giving input and giving content, they might need to do some formative assessments, right? So checking for understanding. Zaretta Hammond says that this is the moment to infuse culturally responsive and sustaining pedagogies, right? Things that are going to help them to draw on their cultural experiences, their sort of youth cultural experiences as well, to make sense of the content, right? And then if that content is organized in a really nice way and sort of elaborated on over and over again, maybe through the use of inquiry questions, you have a better opportunity to have students getting into some long-term memory. And that's what we want. We want our students to remember our lessons, to remember our class. And so this is important because what we're talking about today is literacy, but what Amparo and I are arguing, and I think we're a like-minded group, is that my kids are in the back. So if you hear them, that's what's happening. That you cannot sort of separate literacy from your content. You can't separate literacy from all these other things. They all sort of impact. You all know if you have a great literacy strategy and a lesson that's just not engaging for students or relevant, those literacy strategies are going to fall flat. Let me just give me a second to tell my kids to quiet down, please.
Our kids are the additional members of the team. They're always present.
Yeah. Okay. If anybody has any questions here, feel free to ask in the chat or unmute. But we just want to point out the importance of culturally responsive pedagogy and learning outcomes for students.
Hey, Danny, Jessica here. I agree with you so much. US history, you can make so many connections with history and English. It just requires some creativity on the teacher's end. I just covered westward expansion. You can totally make a connection with immigration.
Yeah.
You can totally, the Gilded Age, the rich and the poor. Economics and the pandemic, the kids today, they make such a connection with like economics and disparities and all that. So it's just about being creative, that's all. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for saying that. 100% agree. So just moving forward, we pulled a couple of quotes also just to kind of reiterate this point about the importance of culturally responsive and sustaining pedagogies. What the framework is saying is that when we start to engage in these practices, we are creating more equitable classrooms for our students, right? And where students have more access to content and strategies that really meet them where they are. Right? So all of this to say is what we're talking about is supported by our state document, the framework, and that oftentimes gives myself and teachers that we're working with who sometimes might be hesitant about some of this, a feeling of support, of being supported. If the state documents are asking us to do this, then let's go ahead and start doing this or continue to do this. And then we have this slide. I'm not going to read all of this, but this is a culturally sustaining and relevant pedagogy. Culturally sustaining seems to be the new updated version. The culturally responsive pedagogy author, I forget her name, somebody could put it in the chat, actually just released her remix. She called it the remix and talks about sustaining pedagogy as the sort of way to go. So this is what's distinguishing about culturally sustaining pedagogy. So I'll leave this up for about a minute and give you a chance to read through some of this. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. If you'd like to reference this or visit this link, Mark has put it in the chat for you. Yeah, thank you, Amparo. Gloria Ladson Billings. Okay. All right, so we want to sustain the cultural and linguistic practices of our community. And what we also want to do, right, is try to present students with a robust understanding of the different experiences across the spectrum for all Californians, all Americans, right? This FAIR Act was created in 2012, and then it was integrated into the California History Framework. right? And so we underline and embolded the parts that seem to resonate with people. What you have is the groups that the state of California is asking history teachers to make efforts to incorporate into their classrooms, right? Now, you probably can incorporate all of these, or maybe you're on a trajectory to start incorporating all of these, and that's totally understandable. A lot of these resources and histories, there's not a whole lot available. We are really proud of the LGBTQ lessons and resources that we have, and lessons about different ethnic groups as well. So we encourage you to check out our website if you would like more of Fair Act related lessons and resources. So if there's not any questions at this point, I'm going to go ahead and move forward, and we're going to ask you to think about all of this as and also what it means to sort of really engage in history. So we have a quote here. I'm just going to go ahead and leave this quote up for you all to read. It's a verb, right? History is a verb. I think for too long, it's been sort of like, I don't know, a noun or something, just like facts and information. And we want students and we want people outside the classroom to know that history is a verb. It's a living, breathing thing. And you got to engage in it. You got to students have to get their hands dirty with like primary sources and inquiry questions and things like that. So based on the quote that I'm showing here, we're wondering, we're looking back at the 7 C's, what evidence are you seeing in that activity of history being done, of culturally responsive and sustaining pedagogies, the FAIR Act, any kind of connections between that quote and these things? Feel free to share in the chat or unmute. We're a smaller group than we expected, so feel free to unmute if anybody wants to share as well. And if it's okay with everyone, I'm going to just move forward because I just noticed it's 6 o'clock. And so I want to go ahead and get into our next strategy. But if this kind of resonates with you or something clicks, you can feel free to share it in the chat. But we believe 7 C's does all of these things. And depending on the kind of content that we choose for the 7 C's, it could be sustaining, culturally sustaining as well. And the FAIR Act line. The glue of all of this, in our opinion, is inquiry. It's the kinds of questions that we're asking. When historians ask questions of the past, they're starting to turn that past moment into history, right? There's a distinction between the past and history that we like to make. And history is brought alive when we start to ask questions about it, right? And so the framework is asking us to ask these questions as opposed to prioritizing the coverage of content. The framework also has a cycle of inquiry for us to engage in. This is a sort of stripped down version. The next slide is going to show a more robust version of this. But we start with our inquiries, we end with reflection, and we sort of pick that up with the lesson that is following the lesson that we're currently teaching. We took this slide from Lisa Hutton, who used to be the director of the Cal State Long Beach History Project. I'm sorry, Cal State Dominguez Hills History Project, my mistake. And she's still a professor there. So if you have your classroom sort of set up in this way, right, where you're doing this cycle of inquiry, you're having students analyze these primary sources, infusing some culturally responsive pedagogies, Fair Act lessons. You're doing your job. You're doing what you're supposed to do. And we think you're creating great learning opportunities and a very engaging classroom. Okay, so let's test this out. We're going to go ahead and do the cycle of inquiry with this next strategy. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce this strategy briefly, hopefully briefly, and then give you enough time to interact with the strategy like we did with the 7 C's. This strategy is called HAPP-Y, and I should have put HAPP-Y on the playlist today. I totally forgot. Missed opportunity. HAPP-Y is an acronym. You'll see what it stands for on the right side of my right side of the screen. This strategy was created by 2 teachers from El Monte. I think they're both from Mountain View High School. Chris Lewis is one of the authors. I forget the name of the other teacher. I remember Chris because Chris is a teacher leader for us and is a real leader in history education in California, in Southern California. So what is HAPP-Y? It's an analysis tool, much like the 7 C's. And what it does is it asks students to look at one singular primary source or a visual source. HAPP-Y works really well with visuals and works really well with primary documents that have a lot there, that are meaty primary sources. It's a group work activity. Students are able to jigsaw. They take on different roles. And there's a lot of speaking and listening. And we know from the research how group work and speaking and listening is really helpful for our English learners when they're supported properly by the teacher. Here's the literacy connections. Let me just read each one for you. I'm joking. I will not do that for you. But these are the speaking and listening standards that we pulled out, the reading standards, and then there's an ELD standard there as well. Right? This is in your digital workbook, so you could spend some time exploring this at another point. So how does this work? Well, the first thing you want to do is introduce the inquiry question, like the cycle of inquiry, to your students. Just let them know, hey, today we're going to be learning about, I'll present the inquiry question in a second, but we're going to be learning about this, and here's the question. So for today, we're going to be learning about Charlie Parkhurst, who was a stagecoach driver during the gold rush. We're going to try to figure out why Charlie Parkhurst is important to California history. Then we're going to form teams of 4. Now, you would normally do this in your classroom. You bunch the students up into their desks, and you'd have these little cards that I'll show you in a minute. But we've kind of created this for the Zoom, so it's a more digital experience. Once you form the team of 4, you assume one of the 4 historical investigator roles that you saw on the previous slide, and I'll show you those again. Here. So we have these 4 slides. These 4 roles, I should say. So what this looks like, if it's in your hand, it's a half sheet of paper. And on the front of the paper, you have this investigator role card. So for example, if I'm in a team with Amparo and Alexma and Carolina, then I will do the context person, and I will know that this is my job, and these are the guiding questions. Right? And everybody else will take a moment to look at their role. Then the next thing we do is we take our graphic organizer, we have our source, and we start from the perspective to take notes after we engage in our analysis, of the source. And these can be very basic bullet point notes, right, that we want to take. So we're jigsawing. Once that's done, that takes some time, then the group shares, and we go in order, the H, the A, the P, and the P. We'll get to the Y later. And you'll notice that on the back of the historical investigator cards, there's language frames that students can use to present their ideas. So on one side, they have their directions and what they're supposed to be looking at, and then the back, they have language frames that they could use as they do the speaking and listening component to this strategy. Right. Everybody shares for a couple of minutes. Everybody shares, and then after that, you have 2 to 3 minutes for clarification, or hey, Mr. Diaz, I have a question. We didn't understand this. Teacher could come over, clarify some things. And then, so this is a 10-step process. And then everybody in the team, all 4 of us, me, Amparo, Alexma, and Carolina, to get together, and we become the Y in historical investigator role. And this is a really big one that requires, I think, multiple people in the group. You can also do this with 5 and have the 5th person Y, But in my experience, it works better if everybody does this together, because we're asking some big questions like, why is this historically significant? And how does this document help us answer this inquiry question? So we construct some ideas, and then we start to write a response to the inquiry question. Right? And that's sort of like, and then we do some reflection, debrief, right? And that kind of concludes the strategy. Whoops. So what I would like to for you all to do is, if you're in your digital workbook, you'll notice that I set this up for you. So it looks like this. I'm on slide 29. And so everything that you need is on this slide here. You have all of your investigator role cards. So when you get into your group, then you can decide who's going to do what role. And then you'll see the graphic organizer. We put it on slide 33 for you. You can type there. And then we have the source. And I just want to show this source for a second. This is an amazing source that my colleague Amparo found. She found the actual obituary from the New York Times. And you could check that out if you want to click here. And what we did is we gave you the whole source. So you might be thinking, oh my God, my fourth graders like can't read all of this. And we understand that, right? This is a really big source. And you can definitely pull out, say, like the last part of the source. If you have done a lesson on Charlie Parkhurst or on the Gold Rush, and you sort of have enough historical context for your kids. But what we've done is we've given you the entire thing, and we've pulled out some what we think are challenging terms. This is from 1880, so vocabulary is going to be a challenge for students, so we pulled that out for you. All right, so there's the source. And then what you want to do is, here's our inquiry question. I put the directions here for you to reference. And what we're going to ask you to do is to get back into your breakout room, to start on slide 29 and kind of work through this process. It is 6:09, and we are going to try to come back at 6:20. Oh my goodness. So hopefully that is enough time. Okay, so I'm done talking. Does anybody have any questions before we start? Happy looking at the Charlie Parkhurst obituary. Okay, well, I'm curious to know how that went. I know that that was not enough time, but if anybody would like to share a little bit about how they're feeling about this strategy or anything else related to the strategy and what we've been talking about, please do. Please do. We have about 4 minutes left.
Hi, Danny. This is Robin.
Hi, Robin.
We just talked in our group. We kind of did a little bit of the activity, but then cut it short so that we could kind of debrief it a little bit, and just talked about the steps that you would need to kind of lay this out throughout the course of a school year. Obviously, you wouldn't start with such a heavy, dense document at the first time you try this. And so, you know, what steps and procedures we would take to kind of lay this out as a tool throughout the year. And then we also talked about how this type of conversation could be a controversial topic in some classes and some communities. And so using this to kind of ground our conversation in the historical as opposed to current political issues, I think is important as well. And then we just talked about how we might modify it a little bit. You know, kids might not, I know my students, thinking of my students, they might not want to automatically turn and talk to their partner, their table group first, without first checking in with somebody else to see if their thinking was correct. And so adding the layer of like a home group, expert group to this activity. So they first go talk to people who did the same thing. So if they were all the historical context people, they would go and talk first and then come back to their table group and share, so that they had someone to check their thinking with, and a thought partner first before sharing with the group.
Thank you, Ram. Those are really great suggestions. Thank you for sharing that. Well, I just want to elaborate on what you said, though. You made a really good point about the sort of potential controversy here. And I think like just reflecting on this, and I know that Don Rumsberg, who is a historian from Sacramento State, I think, or Sonoma State over here in California, was talking about this and talking about that even what the obituary said is that there's many examples in this time of people assuming the identity of the opposite gender, right? It's just that Charlie Parker's, it was unknown for their entire life. And we don't have to make any assumptions about Charlie other than they chose to live their life when they were a stagecoach driver. They chose to identify as a man. And I mean, that is sort of what we know, right? Based on the history. We don't have any other accounts from Charlie themselves. So, you know, even in the pronoun that we use, you see that I'm trying to be really intentional about using they, right? Instead of she or him. And that's something that Don talked about a lot too. So thank you for pointing that out. It is 6:29, folks. Then even maybe one last comment, because we do want to send you off and we have an evaluation we want to share. Okay, so next time we will talk a little bit more about some of these great lesson examples that we have, including a Charlie Parker's lesson that Amparo wrote, and some new lessons that we created for our Lost LA partnership about toys, culturally responsive toys, and a toy company that was created in Los Angeles to create culturally responsive toys back in the 70s. Very cool. We also want to share this stuff with you. If you scan that QR code, it'll take you to a link tree that will have a website, curriculum, our YouTube. Our YouTube channel is very popular. It's where we kind of put all of these workshops for people to view. So please sign up. And you'll have our social media accounts as well. Yep, it is 6:30. Thank you, Amparo. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We do have an evaluation. We really ask that you fill that out for us. Your feedback is instrumental in helping us design more engaging and relevant professional development opportunities. Thank you so much, Adam, and everybody who joined us today. Thank you, Amparo and Mark Anthony, and for all your hard work. We hope that you all enjoy the rest of your evening, and we hope to see you for our next workshop, which is, what date is that? Can we put that in the chat?
Danny, can you go back to the QR code for a moment, and then we will make sure we give everyone the next date. Oh, where's my, maybe I can't.
April 27th. Thank you, Jessica. I forgot. I honestly forgot. I'm going to be honest. Okay. Also, those of you who want to stick around just for maybe 30 more seconds, we're going to put the links to the HAPP-Y physical handouts so you can make copies. There are 2 PDF documents. One is the graphic organizer, and then the other one is all the roll cards, so you can make copies front and back. So we'll put that in the chat if you're interested. Otherwise, thank you all so much. It is great to do these workshops and to be here with you. And we're just very thankful that you take the time out of your busy days to join us. So thanks again. And we hope, again, have a great rest of your evening and a great rest of your week.